Thanks.
Well, Mr. Des Mr. Descartes is known to have said, "I think, therefore I exist." Is that what he said? I think, therefore I exist. Therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. Well, that gets nowhere. You don't know you exist until you're translated. In other words, you have to go from here to there to know that you've been somewheres. Ion says that all the time. You bump something to know that you've been in a state. A previous state. So the biology of sleeping, meaning that you go to another place, is a basic act of translation. It's in our biology. And the reason we talk, converse, and interact with others is that we have to see ourselves through others. We have to translate ourselves. So therefore, I translate therefore I exist. So translation is the essence of consciousness. And McLuhan called it a cliched archetype process. You have an experience, it becomes cliche. And then you flip out of it, have another experience to see what that was before. And what that was before is no longer a cliche, it becomes an archetype. So everything goes from cliche to archetype. So the act of translation, the bridge, metaphor means bridge, the bridge from one being to another being is the most constant, continuous form in existence. And so that may mean that the ground of being is movement. Not absolute stillness. But we know it's neither. The Greeks get all screwed up trying to define whether it was one or the other. So it has to be both absolute movement, absolute and movement. So the translation from one to another is the essence of being. And so we can call that tactility. Tactile is translation from one thing into another.
Do you define art as a form of translation?
Oh, existence is art. That's all art is translation. Speaking is translation. Looking at you and you look at me is translation, because you know yourself by my response to you. I know myself by your response to me. Your translation of what I say and do and what I am, you respond. So responsibility, the ability to respond, is translation. Translation is the basic term. That's why McLuhan has an Understanding Media. He defines one of the chapters as media as translators. And then he says media are metaphors. And what's the metaphor? Well, it's defined by the word bridge. To carry across. To make a metaphor, which is a translation, is to carry across. So that's probably the most basic meaning of being that is in all matter and in all biology. So that fire is a translation of water, is a translation of air, is a translation of earth or stone.
So
So the flow is not a linear flow. It's a multiple level flow, which is then, you could say, synesthesia. Synesthesia is translation.
yes, and the perfecting of the cells will help us translate different
Well, the
ways.
perfection of cell is a translation. That's a translation from a singular double helix strand to 144,000. That's an incredible translation. If we, what is translation per se? What's the definition? Where does it come from? Let's just see that. Translation. I guess you got to get the Oxford Dictionary, but translate. Oh. Okay, definition. Says the active process of changing something from one form to another. There's nothing more basic than that, to change from one form to another. To say a word and then to say another word, that's a translation. Changing from the form of the first word into the form of the next word.
So that's what's happening with the environment. It's being translated.
Yes. Well, that's happening, always been happening. And that's the relationship between past, present, and future, is a translation process. And according to the culture and the media they use, the media being the vehicle of translation, influences the direction of the translation and influences the perception of the translation. That's where it gets complicated. That could be, if translation is the constant, then the old argument whether motion or stasis is the ground of being, motion is the translation of form. Once consciousness gets things moving, translation gets things moving. But the thing that's perceiving it could be considered constant. But it's stupid to stay with that one idea. There's no point in saying, well, we are this, because that's just going to be changed by the synesthesia of translation.
The non-physical is translating everything,
Yes.
like the water and air and pH and carbon.
Well, it is a translation of being. So when the humans fell, they didn't like the translations they were experiencing, so they wanted a major translation. Now that would be death. That would be a major translation of yourself into another form. So they create an environment to translate into, and we call that transitioning. So yes, the Guf was an extension. It was a translation of the conditions here, and then that became an environment. So then translations become environments, and then that becomes what appears to be solid, and people forget that they were translations. That's good enough, yeah.